Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and good night, and welcome to another episode of Endurance Chat. I'm Michael Zalavari, and today we're going to be touching on European Le Mans Series IMSA action and looking ahead to the WEC. But because everyone's schedules are out the window at the moment, thanks world, we're going to be doing it in at least two parts. So for part one tonight, I'm joined with Ollie. Hello, Ollie.
Hello, Michael.
And we'll be talking about the ELMS, and we'll chat about the WEC, their return to racing after 7 months. And we'll have Cookie, Monster, Austin, and Chris Washer doing their bit to cover off the IMSA action over in their part of the world. But firstly, Ollie, ELMS is back! ELMS is back!
It's great.
How good does it feel?
Yeah, I think it's kind of the first one that I've been looking forward to the most coming back online since February odd time when we last had this kind of racing. It's been a long wait for European Le Mans Series, especially after how the last season concluded right up to the last race. It was kind of, that hype was kind of lasting over Christmas. It was like, oh, what's it going to be like next season? What's it going to be like next season?
Absolutely.
And that didn't start until now.
Yeah, I know. It's been a July start for the European Le Mans Series. It's the peak of summer and probably the latest start that the ELMS has had in quite a fair time. And I mean, we did have the Asian Le Mans Series over the summer summer for me, winter for you guys, but it's not quite that same itch. And honestly, I was very, very happy to have the ELMS back. I thought it was a very good return to racing, to be honest, at Paul Ricard, the 4 hours that was there. It wasn't anything too extravagant or surprising, but it was an ELMS race, and from the very minute it started, you just kind of settled in. You're like, yes, this is ELMS. This is exactly what it should feel like. At least that was my feeling. What were your feelings?
I think it was good distraction. Part of this is kind of keeping people entertained while they're stuck at home. Quite a lot of people stuck at home. But yeah, it was kind of comforting to have this back. That feeling.
Yeah, comforting is the right word. And I know personally that a lot of times in some dark times in my life, motorsport has been the comforting factor. Something to look forward to at the weekend, something to get through the week to watch. And it certainly felt like that on that particular day as well, because I'd had a shocker. So it was nice. It's nice to have that comfort. And we've got more comfort coming up. This weekend in particular is packed. But let's talk about the ELMS race. And firstly, it was a no-holds-barred battle in P2 that went down to the wire, and it was United Autosports back in a big way. It was such a statement from them coming back to the season. A double podium for the cross-Atlantic team, and taking the win in P3 as well.
Yeah, it's just United have really hit the ground running, showing how they're a pretty professional team in Pro-Am. And yeah, it's just stated their claim at this season. Look out for us, we're coming.
Yeah, and we kind of touched on that in the preview as well. We said that their second car, which has traditionally been a bit iffy, had all of a sudden taken a massive step up with Brundle and Van Uytert behind the wheel, and that was the car that ended up taking the win. The sister car was also in the mix, the Hanson Albuquerque car. They had a late puncture, which kind of put pay to their final strike at the challenge for the win rather. But honestly, they could have walked away with a 1-2 and no one would have been surprised.
Yeah, I think they should have had a 1-2. And that's a testament to the moves that they've been making in last season. So the second car, we call second car in inverted commas, the 32, they moved later to the Orica chassis. And so they've had less time, especially Willow and the amateur in that car, the silver. But also they've made moves with the drivers' lineups, with Van Uytert, as you mentioned, joining. And, yes, sure, he's young and relatively inexperienced. He's bloody quick. And that showed. He was making moves and had really, really good lap times. So I think maybe the balance is shifting away from the 22 to the 32 in the United Autosport stable. But I think, I wouldn't be surprised if it's a battle between the two of them for the title, and United are going to have an awkward decision to make if they're, double stacking or getting in the way of each other in pit stops and things like that. Kind of a bit like how Toyota are next to each other in the pit lane, and they, over the last couple of years of World Endurance Championship, they've kind of staggered the pit stops and things. And is that going to affect one team over the other? Is there going to be any favoritism? I don't know.
Yeah,
but,
certainly a compelling question that you posed there. In the end, it was the 32 that had the ascendancy, I think even through the pit stops as well, but they weren't unchallenged. The number 26 car, of course, the ever-present 26, kept them honest, and they had the Graf racing car, Thomas Laurent, James Allen, and Anthony Cunard as well in the mix, but Graf had a drive time violation late in the, post race, and got kicked off the podium. Ollie, why do drive time indiscretions still happen? Honestly, you would think that after many seasons that these guys have been racing in the ELMS, even for new teams, like, of all the things you could mess up, a drive time infraction is one of those things that is so simple. How does it keep happening?
Well, before the race, like, you have the briefings, you got the team meetings, the strategists talking about how you're going to split the driver times to optimize the time that your amateur, your silver or below is in the car, so you kind of lose the least, and so that you have your faster drivers in when it counts. But things never go to plan in terms of safety cars, in terms of full course yellows, where it is more beneficial rather to have your amateur when the cars are going slower, so you kind of burn up that time. Now, maybe they changed their strategy mid-race and took a risk. Maybe I can't remember the under time, the time that was still required from the driver.
I think it was,
could it have been a lap time that they kind of thought that the race would go another lap? I don't know.
It was 3 laps, so 6 minutes and 6 seconds. So it wasn't a small indiscretion. That's significant. So a bit of a shame for Graf. They lost their podium for that. But it was a bit of a typical ACO stamp on what was a typical ACO event, really.
Yeah, it had the same feel of previous races. The only thing was, people wearing masks and standing further apart than each other. It had the same feeling. There were some teams that unfortunately couldn't attend. So on that respect, yes, there was a difference, but there was still a pretty sizable grid. Let's be honest.
Yeah,
it was massive. So it kind of hid that pretty well.
And you're not going to stick your nose up at 15 LMP2 cars racing against each other, especially with that level of quality in the field, are you at all? We should talk about a few of the maybe unsung heroes or smaller stories in the P2 field. Firstly, I want to point out the job that Mikkel Jensen did at the seat of the 26, coming out of the championship-winning LMP3 car last season, straight into the G-Drive racing car, and put in a very good performance. So the ACO ladder seems to be working well, not just for teams, but for drivers as well. And a pretty impressive drive as well from the Ricard Mill racing team LMP2 car of Negrão and Calderon, it was in the end. They ended up fifth overall. So a really good result on their first outing in the number 50 car.
Yeah, I think the fit for Andre Negrão in the Ricard Mill team was quite plug and play, because I believe that number 50 car is run by Signatech.
Yes. And
Negrão has driven with them in the World Endurance Championship. So it might be he has a familiar setup that he can kind of plug in and work with Calderon pretty quickly, because there wasn't that much time to sort that drive out after the unfortunate injury to Catherine Legg in practice, or the test session.
The test session, yeah.
So yeah, that was a good start to a new outfit. Even though yes, they are using an experienced team to operate the car. I'm looking forward to seeing what this car can do. And then you mentioned before, yes, Mikkel Jensen. He's an up-and-coming star from LMP3, proving that ladder, as you say. And you wouldn't, if you watched European Le Mans Series for the first time at that race, you would think that he would be a seasoned pro, because the amount of consistent fast laps he was putting in compared to racing wheel to wheel against the pros of the competition around him, he looked experienced. He looked like he was positioning the car well. He was overtaking well. He was using the traffic well. I think this is going to be a massive car for the championship because of that standout performance. If he can keep it up across the year, I mean, I don't know how they do it, especially with the 26. Now that's 3 different Super Silver drivers in a row, between Andrea Pizzitola, Job van Otter, and now Mikkel Jensen, and it just feels ridiculous, like they're breaking the system, like as if they're breaking the rules. It feels
it feels
wrong,
so wrong,
like they're the evil kind of, in inverted commas, the evil team. But
well, we do joke that they're
it's like
they're the evil empire of the ELMS field or the WEC field, because they are just, you look at that team on paper and it's almost unassailable, and on track it's almost the same as well.
Yeah, and also let's not forget the move from Jean-Eric Verne to Nick de Vries. Nick de Vries is going on strength to strength with his pro connections after getting up to speed in sports cars with Racing Team Nederland in World Endurance Championship. And he did another great performance in the European Le Mans Series.
Yeah, so you just sent me a little graph, a box plot sort of thing here, showing some of the LMP2 drivers. Do you want to just quickly explain what it's showing and why the 26 should have possibly been on top?
So it's from Timing 71, the free timing service, which is fantastic.
Shout out James Muscat. Thank you, James.
It shows all of the lap times from each of the around about top 10 drivers that I've cropped the picture to be. And across all the lap times, you get to see the averages. And the top driver is Nick de Vries, and the second best driver is Mikkel Jensen. And that's ahead of lots of other pro and amateur drivers. Now, another standout performance is Will Owen in the winning. So he was the winning silver driver, and he was in 3rd place. Now, he's been in United Autosports in the LMP2 since, I know he was at Le Mans in 2017 at least, and in a United P2 when they were in the Ligiers. So he has some history, it's not like he's new to it. But he was kind of on the fringes back then. And I think now he's really stating his claim to potentially being a future pro. Yeah. Maybe next season onwards, if he gets uprated. So, yes, this analysis service from James Muscat is fantastic to just at a glance do something like this to compare each driver during and after the race. And it puts into it shines a light on how the amateurs and the pros are kind of comparing against each other, and it shows that Jensen in particular had a stunning first race in a P2 car. I knew that he did well. I kind of picked that up from watching, but I didn't realize he'd done that well. I mean, the second fastest average lap time and a much tighter consistency than Nick de Vries in the same car in terms of the consistency plot, and then just faster than everyone else. That's kind of a little ridiculous, to be honest. It shows the worth of having a good team behind you when you're stepping up the ladder. So well done to Jensen for making that move in particular. Now,
we've talked a little bit about the teams that had a good first outing. Now let's turn our attention to those who didn't have quite a nice first outing in the ELMS for 2020. Last season's champion, IDEX Sport, had a shocking race. They suffered from electrical problems pretty well throughout the race. They only completed 30 laps, so while they ended up on track at the end of the race, they didn't complete enough laps to get classified. So a big 0 for them. Also zeros for Panis Racing, who suffered problems. They were my dark horse for the weekend. And Duquesne, your favourite team, or your team of choice, I guess. How would you describe Duquesne, your relationship with Duquesne Engineering, Ollie?
Well, I picked them for fantasy for, was it last year's Le Mans, maybe the year before, and got burned pretty bad. But yeah, I think they are a good team and are growing and growing more now with the LMP3 that we'll talk about later. But,
I remember that discussion about Le Mans because they'd come off the reserve list and had the Porsche, Roman Dumas. And you were like, oh yeah, they're going to be great. They're going to win everything. And then, they had a bit of a torrid time. But yeah, they unfortunately had a failure as well. And then on the last lap of the race, High Class Racing with a failure, which resulted in a DNF because they weren't running at the finish. So, big offs for those guys. And there was a few other, we'll talk a bit more about some other big offs throughout the field, but for IDEX Sport, that is not the way you want to start your championship defense, is it?
Yeah, it's big points lost straight off the bat. It's a strong team, it's strong drivers, and bringing in Richard Bradley, who performed pretty well. So yeah, former Le Mans winner in P2 as well. So it's just not how you want to hit the ground running. Yeah,
and especially with the tighter season in terms of logistically, I think there's even less running. I think they might have chopped around as well. And in preparation for Le Mans, it's not really a great sign in terms of their championship.
Each round is more important.
What was that, sorry?
Each round is more important.
Yeah, exactly.
Point-wise.
Now, just a final comment on P2 before we move on. Just a few looks at indications from the season. So we've talked about United Autosports and G-Drive. Graf were in the mix before they had their drive time issue. But I want to just quickly point out that the top 5 cars were Michelin-clad runners. Not a great weekend for the Goodyears for their 4 teams in the race, finishing 6th, 10th and 2 DNFs for the Goodyear runners. So what do we think about the tyre battle in P2?
I think it's like a bias from having so many teams that are on Michelin's happening to be also some of the best teams.
Yeah, okay.
One of the best teams is Algarve Pro Racing, who are backed by Goodyear with their white and black livery. The 24 was doing super well at the start, and unfortunately had a puncture. Now, is that because of debris, or is that because of actually the tyre development? Yeah. Or I don't know, but there's a good opportunity. But if there are 4 Goodyear cars and only one of them or 2 of them have got a competitive lineup, when you're comparing it against 11 Michelin cars which have maybe 5 or 6 competitive driver lineups, you've starting off the race on the back foot in terms of the tyre war. So also the Michelin teams, they've got the wealth of data behind them, and so it's kind of just an uphill battle at the start of every race.
Yeah,
for the Goodyear cars.
It's kind of the same situation we've described many times on this podcast of the P217 chassis. The fact that Orica has just this wealth and depth of data and teams and talent, and the teams running the other chassis, most notably the Dallara and the Ligier, might not have that same quality to contend with the teams running the Oricas. Interesting point there. So yeah, that was the P2 race. Any final comments on the P2 race before we move on, besides the fact that it was awesome and amazing, and God, I love me some P2 racing?
I second that, obviously. I mean, well, yeah. But I think there's more to come from Spa onwards, because a lot of the more competitive runners didn't make it. IDEC especially,
Yeah.
they should have been up there. And to have we did have three cars going at it in the top, and also let's not forget Graf. So yeah, top four cars were going at it. Add the IDEC in there definitely, because they're a really great lineup and team, and we're going to have a great season coming up in terms of battles. Dragon Speed, maybe they can throw a race or two up the front as well with Ben Hanley. He's a great driver. And yeah, maybe Goodyear have a good race coming up, one or two good races coming up as well on the Goodyear tyre. Maybe they pull it out the bag. Yeah, it's going to be great.
Yeah, the fingers crossed. And it would be nice to see a true no holds barred battle between not just United and G Drive and Graf, but also IDEC, as you mentioned, but Panis and Duquesne as well. I think those two teams are going to be fly under the radar a little bit, just simply because of the quality of everyone else in the LMP2 field. So those two teams, I still think are teams definitely to watch, and it's unfortunate they both had problems at Le Castellet. Now, P3 was also full of intrigue. Firstly, the fact that we had the debut of the new P3 regulations, the Ligier JSP 320 and the Duquesne M30D08 were the two chassis of choice for the weekend. Remember, the Duquesne as well had a 10 kilo weight penalty for the homologation being not submitted on time, which is, you know, a little annoying if you're a fan of the old Norma, which has now become the Duquesne. But it was again, LMP3 has a habit of flying a little under the radar because of the complexities in the pit stop rules, and I feel like it suffered a little bit for how engaging LMP2 was throughout the race, but it was the usual suspects at the front. We made mention that United capped off their great weekend with a win in P3 as well, and then it was inter-Europol competition, the Bakers in the green and slightly weirder yellow liveried car this time around. And then RLR M Sport making good headway to finish third on the podium. What were your thoughts on the P3 race?
It was close, right up to the end. It was only 4 seconds, the gap, first and second. And United overtook to take the lead in the last phase of the race. I think flying under the radar is the best way to put it, because there's less exposure on camera, it feels like, and also not so close and competitive, especially between the chassis.
Yeah.
As you mentioned, the 10 kilo ballast to every car, not the best, but, you know, let's also remember some of these amateurs might also be having an extra 10 kilos of ballast on them, compared to professional drivers who might be a bit fitter. But anyway, I think the bigger issue is Duquesne picking up, or how the transition between Norma and Duquesne happened. The way I understand it is Duquesne bought the rights to the P3 building,
the tender,
that's the right word.
Yeah.
Thank you.
No problem.
And I think they lost a lot of the expertise in that transfer, so they kind of get the P3 and then have to get on with it themselves, and I don't think they've got up to speed with it, especially when you compare it to Ligier, who are an established supplier. They have all the data. They have years of testing. Now, yes, the car is different, but it's relatively similar. But also they could have hit the ground running with testing quicker, because Duquesne had to sort out how to build a car first, from scratch, rather than a team that knows how to build cars, you know, decades of experience.
Yeah, and that's a great point that I think maybe hasn't been touched on. And if you look at the difference in race finishing, not the positions, but the terms of distance covered, the top the top Duquesne, which was Nielsen Racing, which is an established team that has won races in the past with drivers that have experience in P3 machinery, not just in Europe, but around the world, finished 2 laps down, almost 3 laps down, 2 laps and 90 seconds down. So that's a significant gap in performance in the first race of the season of teams of comparable caliber. So it's, I think there might have been, as you put it, a bit more of a messy transition, because you wouldn't expect the chassis after Norma had done so much work and had done quite a good job. Remember, it was basically a Ligier whitewash in the first few years of LMP3. After Ginetta's entry and subsequent exit of the European Le Mans series. And then Norma started to become a bit more of a figure, but it seems to be going back the other way now. It seems that, at least from early signs, that the Ligier is the P3 machine to have. Hopefully,
there's more. Hopefully, there's more parity in future as the teams develop and engineer the cars and get used to them a bit more. We'll see.
Yeah, and there is 2 other P3 machines that were not represented. We've mentioned that Ginetta has a tender as well. Unfortunately, they weren't able to pick up any established customers in the ELMS field for the first race, and then a DES as well. Yeah,
they did have a customer.
Oh, they did.
Unfortunately, yeah, they did have several customers, I believe, and one of them is an established ELMS team that unfortunately, after the impacts of COVID,
couldn't make it,
and the economic situation, could not make it and enter their G59 or 61. I can't remember.
Yeah, so it was unfortunate that we weren't able to see another chassis on the grid in the form of the Ginetta, and then the Ades model has not really been picked up unless you're in Australia, in which it was the first P3 model to be delivered to Australia for the upcoming LMP3 series, which...
I don't think it was a new one, though. I think it was an old outgoing regulation.
Yeah, probably. To be honest, there's been so many whispers and rumors about the P3 championship, so not quite sure what to expect from it just yet in Australia, but we'll see what happens. Any other comments you had on P3 before we move on? I know we haven't really talked much about it, but we talk about it flying under the radar, and it's because it gets so spread out in the middle because of the pit stop rules, the compulsory pit stop lengths. It becomes very difficult to track. So I think there isn't really much else that I can say off the top of my head, unless you had something to add.
Well, I was going to ask you how you felt about the pace of the LMP3s going up and how they mesh with the GTE lap times and the P2 lap times, because for the last regulation cycle, the P3s were, especially when you have an amateur in the car, overlapping with the GTE lap times, where a pro in a GTE car couldn't go faster potentially than an amateur in an LMP3, and it got quite messy. Now, part of that is potentially a source of entertainment, but also now it's more segregated in terms of lap times. Yeah, sure, there were some amateurs that were slower than GTEs and getting in the way. It kind of maybe sanitized it a little bit.
I don't quite think the improvement... I don't quite think the improvements have been as extravagant as people were expecting. Sure, they're quicker. So just looking at the peak lap times of the LMP3 cars, they're about 2 to 3 seconds a lap quicker than the fastest GTE would go. But the leading P3 car only finished a single lap ahead of the leading GTE. So it's not as if that overlap is entirely wiped out. There were occasions where a amateur in a P3 car got involved in a battle for position in GTE, and ended up holding up one or multiple parties in the GTE field. And there were occasions where a pro in a GTE car tried to carve its way through the P3 field and ended up holding up one or more P3 drivers throughout that. It's a very interesting point, because I'm not sure what I want the answer to be, right? I think it is okay that they overlap, and I'm not necessarily sure that that removing the overlap by giving the P3 more pace is a wise or necessary decision. But I can certainly understand how it could be frustrating to have a prototype car that is much quicker through the corners interfering with a GTE battle where they've got much more straight line prowess. I'm not sure. I'm not sure if it was better or if it was worse or if it was the same or if it was different. It just kind of was. Do you understand? Do you understand what I mean?
Yeah, I think something we're going to comment on later as well with the GTE roundup is these cars now are, because of the higher downforce, they are being driven harder in terms of braking, and that then changes how the cars pass in traffic.
Yes.
So we will mention the Fassbender incident, and so long as the P3 drivers remain wary of the differences, then everything will be fine. Whereas if they forget that, yes, the GTEs are heavier and they need to have their own space in the braking zones, then yeah, we'll see how it goes. But we're only basing this off one.
Exactly. This is literally the first race of the new regulations, so we'll see how it evens out and how it doesn't even out over different tracks in the future rounds. You mentioned the Fassbender incident, and I think that's a great pivot point to talk about the GTE race at Paul Ricard. Let's just dive in straight into that incident. So first of all, big Hollywood star Michael Fassbender jumping into the ELMS paddock, and of course, as sports cars does when it gets any sort of attention, the spotlight was firmly focused on him while he was in the car, and he was involved in an incident heading down into the first chicane. A P3 car came across the front, made a completed pass, and then slammed on the brakes, as they tend to do. The problem was Fassbender was already committed to his braking zone, and there was contact, and it ended up spearing the Porsche off that Fassbender was sitting in, off to the right at quite a dramatic speed as well, and actually made contact with the wall at Paul Ricard, which, if you've seen Paul Ricard, is a phenomenal achievement and is something that you have to put in real effort to achieve. So it was quite a significant accident that it ended up being, and yeah, I just wanted to talk about that for a bit, because you made mention the P3s now with a little more power and a little more downforce. It does change the way that they navigate traffic, and this was a classic faster class forgetting about the slower classes restrictions in terms of the accident, isn't it? It was just one of those things where if the GTE car wasn't there, it wouldn't have been a problem, but because it was there, you need to take that into account.
I think Fassbender did a good job in terms of not wiping out the P3, but I think maybe a bit of inexperience about stamping on the brakes super hard and just locking up the rears and going off into a spin. He hasn't had that much time in a GTE RSR 911. He comes from a GT3 Cup background, so I don't know if he's driven even a GT3, which is in between GT Cup and a GTE in terms of performance. But yeah, I mean, the spotlight is going to be firmly on him, and so we're going to know all about his getting up to speed with sports cars in this kind of level. But I mean, there's more to GTE than a
star driver,
a single star driver. But the more people talk about it, I guess the better it gets.
And you can say, he is pulling a bit of the spotlight away from other people, but it is important that when these celebrities, because they are celebrities, when these celebrities do attract the spotlight of the wider world, that you do make the most of it, because it's an opportunity to bring more eyes into the sport and maybe more fans, even if they are casual fans. I mean, Patrick Dempsey, when he was a part of the WEC and sports cars in general, you know, more so when he was driving, of course, he certainly had that factor of bringing people in, just because you go, oh, Patrick Dempsey, I know that guy. He's in this race? Okay, well, maybe I'll give it a little bit of a watch, have a little peek. And especially other sports people as well, you know, like when Sir Chris Hoy was driving in the P3, and you know, the likes of those sort of drivers, big name celebrities who add a little bit of familiarity for people coming into the sport, because it's, you know, very difficult to jump into a brand new paddock and see 60, 90 names of drivers that you have no idea about. But if you can pick out a driver who you know, even if that is through other means, say through their work as a sportsman or a celebrity or whatever, and it gives you something to track and something to keep interest in. And yeah, I think it's important, and that it's important that we celebrate that, even if there is a bit of a bedding in period, which it looks like Fassbender might need to go through. So yeah, I don't necessarily see it as a bad thing.
Porsche are definitely cashing in on it though, or like pushing on it hard, because, you know, putting in Ricard Leitz in that car, with sharing the car with him, that is, you know, a big investment into Fassbender's driving career.
Yeah.
To have someone like that put in your car as your pro, it's a real statement of intent from Porsche. I believe that would mean potentially Fassbender might be doing Le Mans, because there is a Porsche which has Laser, his the third co-driver, but then there are TBDs, but I'm not 100% on that.
That would be a huge step to make so quickly. Like, we've made mention of some other drivers who have maybe skipped steps up the sports car ladder and ended up at Le Mans and put in an unflattering performance. It would be a huge leap to go from GT3 Cup to GTE Le Mans, GTE European Le Mans Series to Le Mans in a season. So that would be huge. I'm not necessarily sure it would be the right call. I'll put it that way.
Understood. Agreed.
Should talk about the other major incident in GTE, which was the single major incident of the race as well, and it was quite a scary incident between the 55 Spirit of Race Ferrari. I think it was Duncan Cameron at the wheel at the time, and there was contact with a P2 car heading into Scene Corner, the fastest corner and most fearsome corner at Paul Ricard, which speared the Ferrari off into the wall, and the P2 car, I'm pretty sure it was one of the Algarve Pro cars. Is that correct?
I thought it was a P3.
P3?
But I may be wrong.
Okay. Either way, it was quite a violent accident in the end for the Spirit of Race car. I saw them DNF from the race, but yeah, what a scary incident at the peak speed of the Paul Ricard circuit.
It's one of the fastest corners in the world, probably. So yeah, I just maximum commitment. Bit scary.
Just a little.
Yeah, Spirit of Race. I think this was going to be the only European Le Mans Series round they were going to do as well, to get practice for Le Mans coming off the reserve list.
Yes.
Because they've taken a step back to do British GT instead. But yes, it kind of puts a dampener on their practice for Le Mans. At least Duncan Cameron got time in the car, I guess, which is the most important thing. But yes, hopefully there's more to come, and they have a clean run at Le Mans.
It was a pretty scary accident as well. We've talked, Seine Corner is a scary corner, and we've already made mention that it's very hard to hit the walls at Paul Ricard in certain places, and there's a lot of room at Seine Corner to go off. And so the fact that they made the wall there is quite terrifying. So it was very good that neither driver was significantly injured, but it did put a bit of a damper on the GTE race, which in the end was not quite dominated, but comfortably taken out by the 77 Proton competition Porsche, Christian Ried, Michele Beretta, and who was this third driver who I keep forgetting the name of?
Is it Andrea? I don't know. Is it Andrea Picciarello?
Picciarello, maybe.
Alessio Picciarello.
Well, there we go. So they were not quite unchallenged, but they took out a comfortable victory from the Kessel Racing number 74 car. Those three drivers, I think, making their European Le Mans Series debut and coming away with a podium. So congratulations to them. And then the Iron Lynx replicating their result from last year's Paul Ricard race, taking a podium for the Iron Ladies, Mick Gosner, Michelle Gatting, and Rahel Frey. A pretty quietly achieving race for them. They weren't really in the thick of anything too significant, but to come away with a podium is really nice.
Yes, I think that's backing up their podium from last season. I think the Iron Dames had. Now they've moved to Team Iron Lynx. Who were they before? Kessel?
Yes, remember. They were Kessel Racing, which is a little weird that you've got Kessel Racing and Iron Lynx racing side by side. It kind of screams as no, it was Kessel Racing. They were racing as Kessel Racing last year. That's what they went to Le Mans as, because not only has Kessel Racing, the Iron Ladies moved from Kessel Racing to Iron Lynx, but also Schiavone, I can't see these names. Pianazzola and Piccini, who were also racing in Kessel Racing under the Kessel Racing banner last year, have moved to Iron Lynx as well. So it kind of screams a bit of a coup for the whatever Iron Lynx has become, that they've maybe split off from riding under another team's banner and are going their own way.
Yes, they've partnered up with AF Corsa, who pretty much run most Ferraris globally in motorsports, and it's a good stable to be part of. I'm looking forward to how the Iron Dames work, as they are committing to a GTM entry in the World Endurance Championship for next season onwards, and then this entry will then also be backfilled with another full female driver lineup. It's not so competitive on paper in terms of being a bronze, silver lineup, where in the World Endurance Championship you've got platinums.
Yes.
But races aren't raced on paper, and they did better than one of the best World Endurance Championship GTM teams that decided to give an ELMS round a go for extra practice. So you never know what could happen. I'm looking forward to, at the next round, more GTM World Endurance Championship entries to kind of compare and contrast to see how maybe they could fare in future. But it's a good start, and good on them.
Yeah, it was. You made mention that team isn't really quite as impressive on paper, but on track, I think especially Michelle Gatting and Rahel Frey are fierce competitors and quite good behind the wheel. Certainly more pace than their silver ratings would suggest. So maybe someone to keep an eye on the other races, and just even, and maybe not for competitive sake, but for interest sake as well. It's still like we harp on about things being a promo or a PR statement sometimes, but it's still quite an achievement that they're doing this as an all-female lineup, and they're getting results as well. It's not just a what's the word I'm looking for?
A phone in? They're not phoning it in?
Not phoning in, but it's not just a stunt. There it is. It's not just a PR stunt. Okay. It's actually a serious effort. you made mention as well the one of the best GTEM teams in the World Endurance Championship. They ended up having a little bit of a shocker, unexpectedly. They were in the mix late in the race. This is the 98 we're talking about, the Aston Martin team of Paul Dall'Anna, Ross Gunn, and Matthias Lauda. And they ended the race with a DNF. Now, it blows me away. This is another, I won't call it a schoolboy error that they did, but it's another one of those things that just shouldn't happen. They were in the pit lane when the leader crossed the line, and as such, they were not on track, not running, and therefore not classified as a finisher. Due to being in the pits when the leader crossed the line. It was a bit of a mess for them in the end.
It was embarrassing.
Yeah.
I mean, if you intended to have a splash and dash because you're that marginal on fuel to then go completely not classified, it's just a bit of a joke.
It's
not a waste of money because they got, I guess, a lot of learning and practice for Le Mans, and Paul Dall'Anna's probably paid for X number of rounds racing his car, so he's getting that out of it. But he's a racer and he wants to win, and he'll be pretty embarrassed by this.
Yeah, and it wasn't necessarily a super clean race from the team either. They were involved in a little bit of contact early on with the P3 car, because that P3 car was being driven by an amateur at the time and was a bit slow on pace. So they actually pulled a cheese grater off it and got given a penalty for that. So they were behind the 8 ball from the very beginning. And yeah, that just capped off a bit of a messy round. They're definitely shaking off the cobwebs for the 98 team as they look to restart their WEC campaign in the coming week. Next week that will be, but we'll talk a little bit about that later. In the end, though, it was Proton from Kessel from Iron Lynx, and boy, it was so good to have ELMS back, wasn't it? I can't stop saying that. It was just so nice.
Yeah, and hopefully there's a lot more good to come.
Speaking of good to come, ELMS are on track this weekend. They're currently setting up at the time of recording at Spa Francorchamps for the second round of the season. And we've gone from, I think, what do we have in the first round? We had 15 P2s, 12 P3s, and 9 GTE cars for a total field of 36 at Paul Ricard. Come this weekend for Spa Francorchamps, we will have 40 cars on the grid for the ELMS race, 4 hours of Spa Francorchamps. That is a healthy grid if I've ever seen one.
Yes, we're going up to 16 LMP2s, 12 LMP3s, and 12 GTEs. I swear, was it last season some races only had 4 GTEs?
Yeah, it felt like that sometimes. They started the season with 9, and then by the end of the season there was only 5 or 6. So 12 GTEs, that's rivaling like the GTD class in IMSA, which we said 12 is a astonishing number after the restart of the season. So that's a big class to be running around in, and it's as you made mention, all thanks to a bunch of WEC cars wanting to come and play.
Yeah, it's a good product to entice people over, because this influx kind of validates the GTE class in the European Le Mans series, because if some of the top teams are willing to give it a go, then it must be a good thing. It's good practice for the restart to the current World Endurance Championship season after a long break. So yeah, I'm looking forward to seeing how they compare with the normal, in inverted commas, the usual faces in ELMS GT. But yeah, it's going to be good.
Yeah, we'll just cap off which drivers and which teams have made the decision to jump on the ELMS field in the GTE class. We've already made mention about the 98. They're returning for a second race. So that'll be Paul Dall'Anna, Matthias Lauda, and Augusto Farfus, who will complete the rest of the WEC season with that team. And will also be alongside Ross Gunn for the WEC round. So Farfus in an Aston Martin is a pretty interesting note. We'll maybe chat a little bit about that in a second. The next three will all be Ferrari. So the 54 AF Corsa Ferrari of Francesco Castellet and Thomas Floor. And then the Red River Sport number 62 of Johnny Mollum, Bon Grimes, and Charlie Hollings. And then the number 88 AF Corsa Ferrari, which is normally the 83 in ELMS competition, but of course that number is already the Iron Dames for the ELMS, so it's the number 88 for this weekend, and that is Francois Perotto, Manuel Collard, and Harrison Newey. So Newey, I think that will also be his first run in a GTE AM car, and
I think so.
Yeah, and so that's a interesting lineup of additional cars for the ELMS weekend. Of those 4 cars, I still think the 98 is the strongest, but it's very close between them and the AF Corsa effort. And especially with Augusto Farfus in the 98 as well. That's an unexpected pickup, I think. I wouldn't have expected Farfus to jump into an Aston Martin, least of all with Paul Dall'Anna.
Yeah, he's a great pickup because obviously pro BMW fame, winning lots of GT3 races and doing well there. It did seem like that was kind of a bit extra contractual, as it were, moving to another OEM and racing under their team, because that 98 is run by the pro AMR mechanics, as it were. Yeah, good pickup. Let's see how he does.
Yeah, now, how about Harrison Newey as well? That's an interesting pickup. Normally, Francois Perotto and Manuel Collard are joined by, I can't remember off the top of my head, it has been so many people in the past.
Is it Nicholas Nielsen?
Yes, Nicholas Nielsen, who would normally also be running an ELMS car, which has not been there for this season. I'm not sure what's happened now to Nielsen Racing. But yeah, Harrison Newey as a substitute is a really interesting drive. And the young driver, of course, I believe it's the son of Adrian Newey, the famed aerodynamicist, has put in some really, really good results lately, including a run in the P2 class. Well, he was running the P2 class with Algarve last season in the ELMS,
yes.
And he had a run with Dragon Speed at Daytona, and he was also at Bathurst running. And then what did he run at Bathurst?
DTM. He's doing DTM as well.
And DTM as well. So he's got his fingers in a lot of pies at the moment, and this will be hopefully a tasty one for him.
Yeah, it's a potentially a downgrade because Nicholas Nielsen is now a professional Ferrari driver doing GT World Challenge. So we were saying that Nielsen was a super silver. We'll see how Harrison Newey shapes up in this entry, but Perotto is a good bronze driver. It's a competitive team.
Yeah, and I think Perotto and Collard suit the GT car much more than they did the P2 car when they had their foray with TDS Racing into P2. Speaking of P2, there is one additional P2 entry for Spa Francorchamps in the ELMS race, and it is Yota Sport. So they'll be running a Orica 07 for Anthony Davison, Roberto Gonzalez, and Jake Dennis, another driver of GT fame, for their entry into the ELMS. Now, Yota Sport, of course, have been running the Goodyear car in the World Endurance Championship. They've taken a race victory in that championship at Fuji, if I remember off the top of my head. We'll fact check that later. We'll edit it. We'll fix it in post. How do you rate their chances against this ELMS field?
Very strong. It's a very good team. The amateur Gonzalez, he's taken a while to get up to speed after moving from Dragon Speed, where he was supreme compared to other amateurs. Maybe it was the tyre switch to Goodyear, and he's getting used to it. But Anthony Davidson, great driver, and Jake Dennis, great driver. So they're a competitive team. They've got really good engineers. So yeah, look out for them.
And we'll round back to this conversation in a while in the second part of our discussions, because those teams that are running dual entries for the WEC as well might have a bit of advantage that we'll talk about then. Now, that is our quick chat. Well, quick chat's ended up being an hour on the European Le Mans Series wrap-up. What we'll do now is we'll move straight into the return to racing for the WEC for the first time in what feels like forever. First time since, I think, the 25th of February was the last race at the Circuit of the Americas for the WEC field. So that's now 5 months ago almost. And we've got some big entry changes for the return to racing. A 31 car field. And the headline change in the entry is a string of changes in P1. Now, the second planned rebellion pre the shutdown has been removed from the entry list. So Rebellion are returning with one car. Another significant change is that Ginetta will not be fielding a car at all for the 6 hours of Spa Francorchamps. However, the P1 class is returned to full-ish strength with the return of the Bicolors car for their hit out before Le Mans. A bit of a tumultuous time in P1 in the last throes of what has been one of the most interesting and engaging classes in sports car prototypes. The loss of Ginetta is a really, really big loss with Le Mans just around the corner, isn't it?
Yes, I think it's Spa is historically, because of its high-speed nature, a testing done during a race kind of thing, leading up to Le Mans historically. So yes, it is an unfortunate move to make when you're trying to get ready for the big one. But yeah, shit happens.
Yeah, it's unfortunate that Ginetta have made this decision. I think it's, well, from what I've been hearing from various people and sources and what I've been able to put together through my own thoughts and ideas, it feels like budgetary constraints would be the major contributor worldwide at the moment. So that certainly feels like a factor, but it also feels like a bit of I don't want to say a middle finger to the ACO, but it does kind of scream like, shout that out a little bit. It doesn't seem that Ginetta have had the best relationship with the ACO ladder in the past few seasons, and this might just well be the death knell of it. So yeah, not great times for the Ginetta camp at the moment, unfortunately. We might do a post-mortem on the Ginetta effort in the WEC this season, should we get compelled to do so, because it's been an interesting foray into LMP1, hasn't it, for Ginetta?
Yeah, they've had, especially with the 5, the pro car, we'll call it. They've showed pace. There's kind of little inklings of if a fully professional outfit takes it up, what they could do with it and emulate what Rebellion have done this season, especially with their several wins. We'll just have to wait for what the number 6 does, with a slightly more amateur-leaning driver lineup for Le Mans. But yeah, we'll just have to roll with it, I guess.
Yeah, so I want to pose a quick question, and don't feel compelled to answer if you don't know the answer, but do we see 2 Ginettas at Le Mans?
It's a great question. So I don't know the financials of the driver lineups in terms of especially thinking of the 5. So if you think of the number 6 and kind of do it as more towards a pro-am kind of setup where you've got a pay driver, if there are drivers out there that want to take the 5 on, then yeah, sure. we can see 2 Ginettas, but or maybe a team from LMP2 that wants to have a shot with the car, but it's a bit of a stretch, I think.
Certainly not quite the perfect time for a global pandemic to really turn the screws on race team economies, unfortunately, for Ginetta. More positive news now, though. Bicolors returning for a hit-out pre-Le Mans was somewhat unexpected, and considering that they were on the reserve list for Le Mans, but very, very welcome, I think, to see the CLM P1 at 01 back on track again. Hopefully we actually see some semblance of pace from that car, because their driver lineup, Tom Dillman, Bruno Spengler, and Oliver Webb, I think, is the third driver for the car next weekend. That is a driver lineup with quality behind it, and hopefully the car is able to echo that.
Yes, I'm looking forward to see how the new guys get on in this chassis. I don't know how the rest is going to go.
Yeah,
they're going to have, I guess, good handicap levels, but I mean, they're going to do their best to negate that, I guess. Yeah. They'll just be there. We'll see what happens. They might be there to pounce if there are any problems with the other cars in the class, but that's standard. Really.
Yeah, I think we've said with Bicolors time and time again that if they beat the P2 field, they've done a remarkable job. So I think that'll be their goal, just to make sure that they get through the Spa race with no problems, because it will be a hit out for Le Mans, which, let's not forget, at the time of recording is 6.5 weeks away. We are so close to Le Mans, and it feels so wrong at the moment. It's not quite the same hype train, and it's all out of whack, but we are so close to Le Mans. Just briefly on the rest of P1, we've gone through the handicap process yet again. It's been a long time since we've seen these cars on track. The Toyotas at Spa Francorchamps, maybe Spa might be the type of circuit which really plays to the non-hybrids' top speed advantage with the handicap. So maybe you'll see the Rebellions in a strong position. Honestly, it's been so long ago, I can't even recall the result of COTA. Did the Rebellions win at Circuit of the Americas, or was it the Toyotas?
The Rebellions did win, so they will be given the handicap that goes along with that in terms of the points, but they're still way behind in the championship compared to Toyota, so they're still going to have a favourable position on the charts. But then also Ginetta being out, who would be on one lap pace a lot faster, it then means that Rebellion are probably going to be still the fastest. And we've had this debate before about how the handicap system works, whether it's you raise the lowest team to the floor or bring the top team down to the top, down to the ceiling. With the Ginettas not being a consideration, it might actually even out. I'm not sure if it will even out or it'll further exaggerate the difference in handicap between the two, because you no longer have that very, very far behind floor that puts you at the maximum handicap. You might actually even see the Toyotas lose a bit of the handicap additionally, because the points gap is no longer as broad as it was for the cars at the last round. Well, because it's capped at 40 points, Ginetta has been behind that cap, and so have Rebellion for a very long time.
Oh, okay. So Rebellion have been below that as well.
Yeah. So, yeah.
Fair enough.
We'll see.
More entries in P2 as well, with the Algarve Pro Racing team making the jump up from the ELMS to the WEC for this race as well. And Eurasia Motorsport coming across from the Asian Le Mans Series for a pre-Le Mans hit out for the 6 hours of Spa Francorchamps. Now, this was a surprise to me, with Yamanaka and Daniel Gaunt being joined by Roberto Merri, for the 6 hour race. I hope that's still going to be dressed up in the New Zealand livery, because that looks sick, and it's going to be really interesting to see how Eurasia compare to the teams in the WEC, because I think Eurasia could spring a surprise. I'm not expecting them to win, but they might just steal a podium, I think.
Well, you never know. They're in it to win it, I guess.
They are also the only Ligier representatives for the 6 hour of Spa, so that will be another little feather in their cap to look at for the race. But as per usual, all the usual suspects are there. Remember, United Autosports have been a part of the P2 class in the WEC as well, with Hansen and Albuquerque, and they've got Paul de Resta with them to complete that team. I'm just looking at this entry list because I haven't in 6 months, and it's like, oh, all these names I used to remember, now they've all just dropped out of my head. So we'll definitely be intrigued by the P2 race. It surprises me though that G-Drive aren't taking up the opportunity to do a pre-Le Mans hit out at Spa Francorchamps, because there is no G-Drive car on the entry list. So their last opportunity for drive time will be the ELMS race this weekend.
Yes, that's correct. I don't know if they need it that much because they're so experienced.
That's true.
As a team. They're also getting the experience at a better level from the Racing Team Nederland team. So before TDS operated TDS Racing, which was the Perodo car, which wasn't really that competitive.
Yeah.
So maybe the data that they were getting from that car wasn't so representative for the G-Drive more competitive car. So maybe they can take the data from the Racing Team Nederland performance with the faster drivers and apply that to learnings for the G-Drive.
Pardon me, interesting point there. So, of course, that'll be something to keep a watch on. 10-car field for P2 for the race. Next is no real changes in GTE Pro, the same 6 cars that we've had all season. And in GTE AM, I think, well, it's still the same 11-car lineup, but there are a few TBAs still on the entry list regarding one of the Dempsey Proton cars. So not quite sure on that one yet. Now, I did make mention that we were going to touch on this in the Spa, the ELMS review. Now, the teams that have doubled up on entries, the likes of Red River Sport, AF Corsa, and Aston Martin Racing, and the last one is on the tip of my tongue. Where has it gone?
There are 2 AF Corsa.
2 AF Corsa cars, of course. Yeah. They will have the benefit of an additional race weekend worth of testing, basically, from the ELMS race to take over into the WEC race. Now, how much of an effect do you think that will have on their performance in the WEC race? Of course, stretching it out to 6 hours, but you do get, additional 3 sessions of practice, so additional qualifying, and an additional 4 hours of track time to really dial in your car. Do you think that might play into effect in the WEC race?
Yes, providing, well, it depends on the conditions. If you've got a cold, damp, wet race,
yeah,
you're gonna learn what the amateurs are going to remember the corners better,
yeah,
as if they were in a simulator. I think, yes, it is valuable in terms of being comfortable with your surroundings, but it depends on the weather, in my opinion. And I think the 88, the drivers have been just announced.
Oh, okay.
A couple of days ago. So it's Thomas Preining, Adrian Delena, and Satoshi Hoshino.
Yes, Hoshino, yes.
Brilliant.
Who is that second name that you made mention of? Andrea Delena?
Adrian Delena.
That sounds
in
Dutch.
Porsche Super Cup.
Okay. Fantastic. Which I've certainly been watching a lot more of, seeing as I've got access to it and it's been on, and there's not been too much else to watch lately. A great series Super Cup is, actually. I should have been watching it longer. Now, 31 cars is not the same strength as the ELMS field, but it is still interesting enough for an interesting race, especially in the Prototype 2 and the GT-AM class. Now, are you brave enough to make any predictions in terms of race winners in class for that race? Are you brave enough, Ollie?
No.
No, okay. am I going to be able to force you into it anyway?
Yes.
So for the benefit of our listeners at home, who do you think, in your expert opinion, seeing as you've got all these graphs and everything that you've been doing, who do you reckon is going to be the ones to watch?
So Rebellion will win overall because of the handicap levels, I think. Yeah, good team. So long as they do a clean race, they deal traffic well. In P2, my pick for the win would be United Autosports.
Okay, yep.
In GT Pro, I'm going to go with the 91.
Nice.
And if it's going to be really hot, I'm not sure about Aston Martin in that class, because they do a lot better with like cold, wet races.
Yep.
I think they burn through their tires too much. GTM. I can't remember the ballast levels.
Oh, yes, of course. That's another complexity we haven't talked about.
They have the success ballast system, which is working okay. I think the Ben Keating car, the 57, is okay, but they're going to have weight. I think the TF Sport, they're going to do well, but they have weight. Oh, I don't know.
So it's very interesting, just to jump in over the top of you, that you mentioned the weather, because I've just went and had a bit of a lookaroony at the Spa Francorchamps weather forecast. For this weekend, for the ELMS weekend, it is forecast to hit 32 degrees at race time, at race start for the ELMS field, which is a really nice summer's day, actually. I'm a little jealous. I'd love 32 degrees at the moment, seeing as I'm freezing my butt off in Australia, where it's been quite cold lately. For the WEC race, it is at this stage, and we're talking 9-10 days away, forecast to be 20 degrees with a non-zero chance of rain throughout the race. So quite a difference in temperatures and ambient conditions. So yeah, interesting that you bring up temperature, and it'll be interesting to see how that affects the racing there. Okay, with that knowledge under your belt now, does that change your thinking?
Well, I've said it now. Got to stick with it.
Fair enough. I'll agree with you on P1. I don't think with the ballast situation, the way that Rebellion will be headed. I actually I'll chuck in Racing Team Nederland as a dark horse here. I reckon if Fritz can have a good stint, and he's had a good stint once or twice at Spa, and we've seen the likes of Van der Gaard and Van Uytert do amazing things at Spa. I reckon if they get lucky, they might nab another one. Let's not forget. I'm always going to pick Porsche and GTE Pro, so I don't even know why I bother. And for GTE AM, I reckon the AF Corsa car, the number 83, despite whatever ballast that they've got on board, I reckon they'll still have the pace. And I think the fact that they're racing the week prior will give them a little bit of an advantage. Now, this is all very important for these teams, because this is their last hit out before Le Mans, which, as I've said already, is only going to be 6 weeks after this race. It snuck up on us, hasn't it? It's very, very close, and it doesn't really feel like Le Mans time, obviously for a variety of reasons, but it's not too far away, and it won't be too long until we're staying up all night to watch this race on the French streets. Yeah, it's coming along pretty quickly.
Yeah, there's no excuses for being unprepared for these teams, so they've got to be ready and raring to go in not that long a time, and they haven't had half of a full season to prepare as we would usually have. And then for WEC, obviously it's the finale to a season.
Not this season.
Anymore.
Not this season. Not anymore.
But whatever. Also, I don't think I picked a GTM, so I'm going to stick my neck out and say the 56.
56, the
bold.
The other the Team Project One car. Yeah, that's fair. That's
original.
fair call. Yeah, it's I think the results from this race will be not as useful as indicators for Le Mans. In the past, we've said that Spa is basically the test bed for the Le Mans race. It's the dress rehearsal, kind of like how the Paul Ricard 6 hours, the dress rehearsal for the Spa 24. But I think there's going to be a lot more going through the process, blowing out the cobwebs. We've been off for 5 months in WEC competition. So for a lot of these teams, or a lot of these drivers, it's going to be their first foray back into proper racing for a long time. So it's going to be maybe not as clear cut as it might appear at the end of this race. In saying that though, it is going to be quite nice to have WEC back. It is already very nice to have ELMS back, and from the sounds of the Road America race, it's also been nice to have IMSA back. And this weekend coming up, we've made mention that there's ELMS. There's also, if you're into sports cars, the GT World Challenge Europe and GT World Challenge America, and a bunch of supports for other series around the world. There's like 8 or 9 different major motorsports events on this weekend. So if you've not got anything planned, well, now you do. On that note, thank you very much for joining me tonight, Ollie. I hope you recover nicely from your very nice bike ride yesterday.
We'll see.
I hope your legs don't turn into mush over the course of the next 12 hours. And thank you very much for listening and sticking with us. We will see you guys after the next WEC race, hopefully, for a wrap-up and a wind-up to Le Mans. I've been Michael Zalavari. Peace out!